And while you are in uniform, you should not do anything to reveal your political opinions and your affiliations, but rather you are required to be agnostic and, of course, to follow all lawful orders. Of course, what you do during your personal time and out of uniform is your choice, but you also know that you must carry yourself in or out of uniform as a representative and embodiment of this nation. It is also the responsibility of those who lead or who manage these forces not to put individuals in places, physical or otherwise, where this requirement can even appear to be compromised. The commander-in-chief or any other commander or senior leader should never screen people based on their apparent alignment with his or her agenda, should never use soldiers or sailors, etc., in photo ops clearly designed to elevate the political, like perhaps wearing a MAGA hat while standing with them. It is an obvious and outrageous blurring of the lines, of those bright red lines, for those in uniform to show their political colors or be forced to stand in front or behind of those who have them on. This is an obvious and unfortunately necessary amendment, stating the obvious because of the unfortunate time that we are in and the worrisome and continued politicization of our military. This committee, I know, bilaterally, unilaterally, bipartisanly knows better, and I hope that we will vote unanimously in support of this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes another Pennsylvanian, Mr. DeLuzio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support Mr. Ryan's amendment. I'm thinking back to when Chairman Kane was in front of us in this committee and gave, I think, correct and honorable testimony in response to my questions and others about how you should behave in uniform when you're presented with a choice to attend a political rally or partisan event, that I think we all agree here is the right approach, which is that you follow the guidance that DOD has. As I understand Mr. Ryan's amendment, this would simply make that guidance the law, a policy that I think we all support in this committee. I think it's the right thing for the country and for our troops. I think it respects the chain of command, any commander-in-chief's prerogative, and protects our troops from being used in a partisan way that would violate not just the spirit of the law, but the oath that we all take to the Constitution. I think it's common sense. I think it's a policy that we all agree with, and I urge support of Mr. Ryan's amendment. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Van Orden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would really like to point out the selective outrage of my colleagues. I do not recall anybody on that side of the aisle protesting vociferously when the former Secretary of the Navy openly endorsed President Biden for re-election, and who, quite frankly, confuses presidential candidates with our former Speaker of the House, for that matter. And I'm confident that the American people will step up to the plate come November and support President Biden for a second term as our Commander-in-Chief. He did that speaking as the Secretary of the Navy, and again, I don't recall anybody condemning that. So President Trump is the most pro-military president we've had in my lifetime, and he should be praised for supporting the United States military. And if you want to be mad at everybody. But again, I can send this to you. We can enter it to the record if you want. This is foolish. This is a political move, and we're talking about not politicizing the military, and that's exactly what my colleagues are doing. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
I'm really pleased with the debate that's going on here. Our Democratic side seems to be pointing out the Trump issues, first term as well as the second, and our Republican colleagues are pointing out the Democratic missteps on the same issue. Mr. Jackson did that, did it well. Mr. Van Orden just followed up with it. It seems to me that we are in agreement, and that if we put aside the politics, the individuals, that is Biden, you probably go all the way back to Obama, and then on the Democratic side and Trump on the Republican side, just set that aside. Set aside the political issues, which we're all caught up in. It's part of our life, and we accept that. But we ought not accept it here. We ought to take a look at the underlying policy. What is it that this bill actually does? This bill fully restates what we think should have been the normal and appropriate use of the military. That is, in every way except politics. You know, We can blame Democrat and Republican presidents, senators, probably ourselves, and this particular amendment deserves to be stripped of its current political heat and looked at for what it actually would accomplish if it's in the NDAA. It sets the standard. Now, maybe there's wordsmithing here, always is, but it sets the standard of the appropriate role of the military in our political life. And I don't imagine that there is a Republican or a Democrat on this committee, and I would hope in the whole House and the Senate included, that would say, no, we think the military ought to be politically engaged. In fact, I've heard arguments from Democrats and Republicans, that's not right. This amendment, stripped of the current political life we're living in, is really good policy. And I think if we can put aside the current blame game, we would say, yeah, this is exactly what the military how the military should conduct itself. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Strickland.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a high-ranking military leader from JBLM as my guest during a State of the Union address. And I invited him to a reception that was being held by the Democratic leader. And he said to me, "Ma'am, thank you for the invitation, but I cannot attend that event because it's political in nature." So there are people who serve who know better. But to have a political rally and to sling merchandise on post is a bit much. And I do agree with Mr. Garamendi. This should be something that applies to everyone, regardless of political affiliation. Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield the balance of my time to Congressman Ryan.
Thank you, Ms. Strickland, and I really want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Van Orden, for your comments, and you as well, Mr. Garamendi. I'll say I only had 3 minutes in my opening. I think what President Biden did in one of his speeches, flanked by 2 Marines, also was concerning in this regard, and we should be able to say that in a bipartisan way. I know it's 9:42. We've been here almost 12 hours. There's a lot of good bipartisan work we did in this bill as a credit to the chair and the ranking member and a lot of people in this room. We spend a lot of the hours, as we all know, on the wedge issues, but I genuinely feel like in the moment we're in, when I think about our young service members, like we owe them this. I really think we owe them this. We can acknowledge political leaders in both parties have been making these mistakes. This is really an opportunity for us to say, don't make those mistakes. Let's leave no doubt that both folks are missing the mark, and we can show a leadership moment here. So I appreciate my colleagues who weighed in, and yield back to Ms. Strickland.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up one comment that was made earlier by the gentleman from Wisconsin about the Secretary of the Navy. He did make those comments. There was no question that was an accurate description of it. I would note the Secretary, when it was reported and there was some criticism, self-reported to the Office of Special Counsel, and I have the Navy Times article where they indicated he was found in violation of the Hatch Act because of that. But again, I want to just sort of say it's a false equivalency to say that nobody reacted to when he made those comments. The fact of the matter is the process was triggered and there was a Hatch Act sanction that was imposed as the result of it. And to his credit, he stepped up and acknowledged that. We haven't seen that from the incident that was described by Ms. Sherrill at Fort Bragg, which, again, in my opinion, far exceeded what the Secretary of the Navy commented at that moment. But again, he took the hit for it. And that's the way the system is supposed to work. And that's what I think is really concerning right now, is that we're not seeing the checks and balances in play. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating is recognized.
Well, thank you. I support the amendment. I think it really clarifies a lot. And if we're going back talking about the Navy, and we're going back a few years, when President Trump, in his first administration, visited Japan, there were reported efforts from the White House to obscure the name of the ship, the USS McCain. And that was clearly the case. In fact, the president said, now somebody did it because they thought I didn't like them. Okay, they were well-meaning. Later on in that day, not only the crew wanted to be part and participate in the president's visit, but because they wore the insignia, USS McCain, on their uniforms, they were told to go home for a long weekend. When some of them showed up anyways on their own time to participate, they were turned away. So the clarification of this, I think, is important. It's just not a new issue. It's there, but there shouldn't be this kind of politics in the military, and certainly not one in the instance I just recollected where a U.S. hero was the subject of that scorn. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member seek recognition on the Ryan Amendment? Gentleman, Mr. Vindman from Virginia.
So just want to take a moment to discuss this issue of politicization of the military. As a former judge advocate, we trained the military on not Hatch Act, but the DOD instruction that prohibits partisan political activity. And what we saw at Fort Bragg was obviously a display of that. Soldiers that were selected based on their political inclinations toward the president. And you know, we have a ton of folks on this committee that obviously have military experience, and a few of us are also career military officers. And you look at any one of these things individually, and you may not say, well, you know, this is okay with firing general officers, or this is okay not having DOD inspector generals. This is okay having soldiers in the 82nd in uniform supporting the president, making it look like a political rally. But you got to look at all these things in the aggregate. And in the aggregate, these are really dangerous steps towards politicizing the military. Very much inappropriate, very much not in the spirit of the Department of Defense instructions. I look forward to hearing what exactly happened after there's a full investigation at Fort Bragg. But that is why I support this amendment. We're straying way too far towards having partisan political politics in the military, and that's totally inappropriate. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on the Ryan Amendment? There is no further debate. The question occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Ryan. So many as in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote is requested. A recorded vote will be postponed. We now consider log number 5455 by Ms. Sherrill of New Jersey. For what purposes does the gentlelady from New Jersey seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentlelady for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I am bringing this amendment because I believe that the apolitical role of our military must be protected. The military is one of the most trusted institutions among the American people. And for centuries, that trust has been reinforced by laws like the Posse Comitatus Act, which provides the American people with a guarantee that our armed forces are there to protect them, not to police them. Now, as we all know, Title 32 outlines the role of the National Guard when under state control. 5 years ago, we saw a novel interpretation of Title 32 under which Guard units from out of state were brought to Washington, D.C. to perform law enforcement functions. The law specifically prohibits our military from acting in a law enforcement capacity when under federal command, except in very clear circumstances. And because of the unique structure of the D.C. Guard, those out-of-state Guard units were under the direction of the federal government, even though they had not been activated under Title 10. The Posse Comitatus Act exists for a reason: to protect Americans and our service members from having the military act as a police force. Likewise, the Insurrection Act exists for a reason: to guarantee that the President has the ability to ensure that Americans' constitutional rights are protected even when facing stiff opposition or outright insurrection. Many of you will remember I've brought this amendment several times over the last 5 years. I continue to offer this amendment because I truly believe in the principles involved. It is critical that the sacred separation between our military and our law enforcement is preserved, and it is imperative that this committee does everything in its power to preserve it. In years past, when we debated this amendment, I heard concerns that had this amendment been enforced during the Civil Rights era, it would have prevented presidents like Eisenhower from using the National Guard to support school integration. This is not true. Presidents Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson followed the law. When Americans' constitutional rights were threatened, they invoked the Insurrection Act and deployed Guard units. My amendment would not change that. While I commend my colleagues for their dedication to a president's ability to protect Americans from attacks on their civil rights, this amendment would do nothing to change that ability. Congress and this committee have a responsibility to protect the role of the military in American society, and we have a responsibility to make sure that no president, regardless of party or political climate, has the ability to circumvent the law that is meant to protect everyone. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes himself. While I appreciate the gentlelady's interpretation, I am genuinely concerned this amendment would undermine the President's authority to activate the National Guard in crisis. It would give the governors and the mayor of Washington, D.C. the power to limit constitutionally and federally granted authorities of the President to execute laws, suppress insurrections, repel invasions, or respond to national emergencies. If a governor or the D.C. mayor refused a request, then federal support could be delayed or denied entirely right when it's needed most, such as during a civil unrest or a natural disaster. In particular, I cannot support inserting the D.C. mayor into the National Guard chain of command under Title 32. For over 5 decades, the chain of command for D.C., National Guard, and emergencies has clearly run through from the President to the Secretary of Defense and then to the Army and the Air Force Secretaries. It should stay that way. Therefore, I oppose the amendment. Does anybody else seek recognition on the gentlelady's amendment? Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as you said, this amendment would require the President or Secretary of Defense to obtain consent. And this is like giving veto power to a mayor or governor over the President's constitutional powers, and to restrict the authority to deploy the National Guard in times of national emergency. And I think that would potentially compromise public safety. We just saw recently in Los Angeles the mayhem and chaos and lawlessness. And so this creates confusion in the command structure and makes it harder to coordinate fast, unified responses during major crises or emergencies. Therefore, I would urge all my colleagues to vote no on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other members wish to speak on the amendment? If there's no further debate, the question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentlelady, Ms. Sherrill. So many as are in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. No. Opinion chair, the noes have it. Recorded votes requested. Recorded vote shall be postponed. We will now consider log number 5579R1 by Mr. Scott. For what purposes, gentlemen from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment without objection? The reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is, in effect, the text of the Bipartisan Salute Act introduced by Representatives Brian Jack and Shamari Figures. It has 25 additional bipartisan co-sponsors, including several on this committee. It would establish a pilot program to provide military families the option to purchase a low-cost, department-approved cancer supplemental plan to help pay out-of-pocket expenses in the event of a cancer diagnosis. The department has acknowledged in writing, and we all know, that service members must sometimes pay out-of-pocket for health care expenses, as we all do. This would be supplemental coverage to TRICARE. At the end of the pilot program, the department would report back with data on the program. If successful, it could be continued. If not, the program would sunset. I would ask your favorable consideration of it. And again, the department would be authorized to competitively bid 2 contracts to vendors to provide low-cost policies, just like TRICARE's setup is. Military families could choose to enroll through the department's normal online benefits portal. Terms, benefits, and conditions would be spelled out by the department in a simple, objective manner. If covered a family member diagnosed with cancer, a direct benefit would be provided to immediately help cover out-of-pocket expenses as they are incurred. And with that, Mr. Chairman, it is pretty simple. It's a product that's offered probably in the vast majority of medium and large private sector employers, and this would simply start a pilot program to offer it to our military families. With that, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have concerns with this amendment. Basically, it provides gap insurance. And as I understand it, several insurance companies want to offer a specific gap insurance program to military service members and their families. What I've heard from the department, there's considerable dispute about how much this gap insurance would cover that's not already covered. And the other aspect of this that is in this is not just to offer it, but in the, and forgive me, I did not serve, so I haven't filled out all of the forms, but when you go through the normal form process, this amendment would require there to be a box where each member would have to affirmatively, service member would look at it and decide whether or not they wanted this insurance, which is kind of like pushing the insurance on the member, putting it on the service member, putting it in front of them. So, really want to make sure we're not encouraging members to buy insurance that they don't need. Now, if they want to offer this plan, that's fine. I don't see why the military has to basically offer it for them. As I understand it, I don't think we do this with other insurance. So I think the net result of this was you will be forcing members to, they will have to make a decision on this as they sign up. And if it's on the form, it kind of implies that the military thinks it's something that you ought to consider. So I am concerned about this resulting in basically service members paying for something they don't need. So I am opposed to the amendment. I understand it is in all likelihood going to pass, and we can talk about how to work on this going forward. But I don't want to benefit insurance companies at the expense of service members and their families. Like I said, there's nothing to stop a service member right now from buying gap insurance. If they want to buy gap insurance, there's nothing to stop the insurance companies from offering a plan specifically to service members. This is us kind of giving our statutory stamp of approval to it, and having the Department of Defense also give its stamp of approval to it by putting the option in front of members to purchase it. And that I don't support. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support this legislation. It doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime. And I've met people who have needed this coverage. They've had to travel and pay out of pocket to go to a different hospital to get cancer treatment. And I think we could be very clear to address the ranking member's concerns that say the military is not pushing this. It's just an option for people to consider. But I have known folks who had cancer. They have to pay out of pocket to travel and do other expenses, not necessarily that the cancer care may be provided, but there's all these additional expenses. And that's what we're trying to do here. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized, Mr. Garamendi.
After 8 years as insurance commissioner, I usually wake up in the morning and swear never to engage in that conversation again. However, Mr. Scott, you have tickled my memory here. And I think the issue that the ranking member raised is that these policies can and should be available to members. I do notice that you have, in your amendment, requirements that the insurance that is being sold is available in every state and therefore arguably regulated by that state. Insurance being regulated state by state. That's a difficult thing to achieve, but it's extremely important in this case because these people are moving around. I think that you may have gone a step too far by bringing the military into making the decision of which insurance companies will be able to sell their policies to the civilian and military members. That is a very heavy obligation of the military to basically regulate the insurance companies. I think that Mr. Bacon was onto something, as was Mr. Smith, that these gap policies are probably useful in many of these families and individuals for reasons that have already been articulated. But I think that what we may want to do here is to open the door to companies to sell these policies on the base and let the regulatory regimes of that particular state cover that sales program. I will tell you from my experience, regulating the insurance company is a huge task, and choosing an insurance company that is sound, does good payment of claims, quick and full, it is a very difficult task, and one that I don't know that the military should be doing, but rather making these policies available would be a good idea. So let's work on this. I know what you're trying to do, but I think you may be doing it in a way that is going to create a whole hassle. So with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. Does anybody else wish to speak on this? Mr. Davis, North Carolina.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member. I want to start by saying that I truly hear loud and clear the concerns raised by the ranking member. And I also want to acknowledge that there have been several of those, including myself, that's been part of this, the SLUT Act. And at the end of the day, we want to do anything possible to help, especially those who may be dealing with cancer diagnosis. So what I would simply say, just listening to the tone, and that is, as we can continue to explore this, as supplemental options are made available, and this, again, looking at it from a pilot perspective, can continue to be a valuable option. I think it's definitely worth seeing if we can work out and figure it out moving forward. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you. And yes, some of us have been working on this, trying to figure it out. So thank you, Mr. Scott.
I thank the gentleman. He yields back. Chair, I recognize Mr. Whitman of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. And so prior to being a member of Congress, I was actually an insurance broker for about 2 decades and licensed in multiple states, including the state of California. And the reason you don't want it to be an individual contract, the reason you want it to be a group contract instead of an individual contract is because the consumer gets significantly more for the same number of dollars. So if you open the gates and you let agents go in and sell individual contracts to the different members, a couple of things happen there. One is some agents aren't necessarily good. Most of them are, but some would sell people more than they could afford. I don't want that to happen here. But two is, if you're doing this with this volume that this would allow for, you're going to get a significantly better price than you would if you were selling the individual contracts like you would sell at a 4-person or a 5-person or maybe even a 10-person business. So it's an opportunity. If it doesn't work, it can be stopped. I do think we can make it work. And I do want to explain that one of the key differences in this contract, these contracts, and what you get with TRICARE pays the health care provider. But there's a tremendous number of expenses, sometimes hotel bills, gas, fuel, travel bills, babysitters, all of the other expenses that come when someone is sick that your major medical and your TRICARE is not going to cover. And this is simply an option to help people cover some of those expenses with what I think will be an exceptionally cost-effective product if it's offered to this volume of people instead of individual contracts. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And I would like to emphasize what Mr. Davis was saying, and that is this is a pilot program. It's how you work the bugs out by having a pilot program. So I just don't really see the reason to oppose this. Anybody else wish to speak? If there's no further debate, the question occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Scott. So many as are in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Okay, we will now consider, the amendment is agreed to. We will now consider log number 5618 by Ms. Sherrill. For what purposes does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will please distribute the amendment. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, across the country, women's reproductive freedoms are under attack. After the Supreme Court's MAGA majority overruled Roe, 19 states now outright ban or severely restrict abortion access. So my daughters have less freedoms than I did while growing up. And it's unthinkable to me that so many of our servicewomen are already serving with less rights than I had while in the Navy. They're being stationed in states like Texas or Florida without basic access to reproductive care. The fact that our military treatment facilities are only allowed to provide abortions in extremely limited circumstances is unacceptable and puts the health and well-being of our service members and their families at risk. The decision to get an abortion is deeply personal and should be made by a woman and her doctor, not by politicians. Our service members expect that they will receive the best possible health care, but our military health care providers can't even give them an abortion when their health is at risk. And we know that, quote, exceptions to abortion bans don't work. We see horrific stories on the news about women who were denied care that they were supposed to receive under an exception, often ending with the mother nearly losing her life. We have more than 100,000 active duty service members stationed in Texas. We've heard stories of a young woman who died after experiencing a tragic miscarriage at 17 weeks. After being faced with this devastating loss, her doctors delayed medically necessary and life-saving care because of the state's abortion ban. She died as a result of an infection she developed because that care was delayed, leaving behind a young daughter. In Georgia, another young woman experienced a rare complication with a medication abortion where her body did not expel all of the fetal tissue. When she sought out medical care, she waited 20 hours before doctors were able to operate because of the state's abortion ban. While she waited, her infection spread and her organs began to fail. Amber's care came too late and she died as a result of the infection, leaving behind a 6-year-old son. We ask our servicewomen to put their lives on the line for this country. They shouldn't have to risk their lives giving birth. But the fact remains that a woman should never need a so-called exception to get an abortion, and it shouldn't need to be an emergency before she can get care. It should be available as a decision she gets to make over her own body and her own life. My amendment would repeal the draconian ban on abortions within the military health system, allowing our service women and military families to have the freedom of access and the freedom to choose. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this amendment. The amendment would repeal Section 1093 of Title 10, which would force American taxpayers, coerce American taxpayers, force them, including those with deeply held moral and religious objections, to fund elective abortions through the Department of Defense. This is unacceptable, it's deeply divisive, and it's completely inconsistent with our longstanding bipartisan agreement that we have had. The prohibition on federal funds for elective abortions has been the law of the land for over 40 years. It's also a longstanding provision, by the way, that the majority of Americans support. In January of this year, a Marist poll found that a majority of Americans oppose taxpayer dollars going towards abortion services. Again, this amendment violates the sanctity of life. It upends a long bipartisan agreement, and it goes against the majority of Americans' beliefs. The law is clear. DOD has no business funding or performing elective abortions with taxpayer resources. And I urge my colleagues to support life. I urge them to support common sense. And I urge them to oppose this amendment. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very, very proud to support this amendment, which builds on my bill. That's the March for Military Service Members Act. And I thank my colleague and my great friend, Representative Sherrill, for offering it today. I hope and I believe that this might be your last NDAA. This administration's attack on reproductive health care for our servicewomen is just another way to try to get women out of our military and to try to discourage other women to join. When you're a woman, you raise your hand and you swear an oath to the Constitution to protect and defend this nation. You go where you're needed. By the way, the same goes for men as well. You go where you are told to go. Our service members don't get to choose where they're stationed, and nor should they. And for many service women and many service family members who are also women and girls, that means going to states where basic reproductive health care is criminalized. I think that we can agree that service members and their families should, without question, be able to access health care on their own time and with their own resources. But this administration's attack on both reproductive health care and women in the military threatens to make even that impossible. I had my oldest child while I was in uniform. As a veteran now, I reflect back and ask myself, if I had happened to serve in Pete Hegseth's DOD today, would I feel comfortable? Would I feel safe with my obstetric and gynecological choices? And the answer, unconscionably, is maybe. I was stationed in Boston at that time. But what if I had been stationed in today's Texas, where my youngest daughter now lives? I would most definitely not feel supported or safe. So I ask my colleagues to support this amendment and to ensure that health care is available to our military and their families, to everyone, everywhere, every time, because they give their lives to protect us. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I strongly support this amendment. And if it, as it was said, if you support life, if you support the life of our service members, then you should also support this amendment. As was so eloquently stated by the ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, America's service members don't get to choose their mission. Where they go, where they live, and what they do is up to the needs of the nation. And in return, we must ensure that our service members and their families have access to the high-quality health care that they need wherever they are stationed, the health care every single person deserves and we fight for here in Congress. We are not meeting that promise to our service members. In many states and in some countries where service members are stationed, they do not have full access to essential reproductive health care, including abortion, without having to travel hundreds of thousands of miles in some, or thousands of miles in cases. Just in the United States, more than 2 million beneficiaries of the military health system live in the 12 states in America where abortion is prohibited or almost fully restricted. And RAND found that roughly 40% of women on active duty have either severely restricted access or no access to abortion care. Nearly 40% of military spouses say state abortion bans would make them less likely to recommend military service to others. States with restrictive abortion laws have higher rates of total maternal mortality. And while female service members put their bodies and lives on the lines each day in defense of the nation, we must not further put them in harm's way by denying them access to basic health care, which includes abortions. The restrictions that Congresswoman Sherrill's amendment would repeal prevent service members and their families from getting the health care that they need, and they interfere in the doctor-patient relationship. Everyone, including our military families, should have the freedom to make decisions about their bodies and their health care. The current policy is cruel. Access to health care is a sacrifice no one should be asked to make, especially those that are already sacrificing so much in defense of our freedoms and this country. It's long past time to repeal these restrictions and allow service members and their families the access to care that they 100% deserve. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we just heard that women, the supposition was that women would be less likely to join the military because they can't have their abortions paid for by the American taxpayer. Readiness, therefore, would then be affected. And I think it's absolutely hyperbolic and ridiculous to say that this administration wants women it's going to discourage them to join the military or encourage them to leave if they're already in. So let's look at facts. In 2010, women made up approximately 15% of the military. Now it's 18%. It didn't go down. It wasn't static. It went up. And then for one of our colleagues to say that Texas is this state that's draconian and full of darkness. Well, people vote with their feet. New York State, Population from 2010 to 2025, population went up 3%. California, it went up 6.7%. And in New Jersey, interestingly enough, it went up 7.9%. But in Texas, in that same time frame, it magically went up 28%. People vote with their feet. Texas strong. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's funny to me that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle keep talking about what is being forced on the American taxpayer, when the only thing being forced is women being forced to give birth. Restrictions and bans on abortion care don't match up with how things work. They deny basic rights, endanger people's health, and ignore their wishes. Everyone deserves bodily autonomy and the right to make decisions about their own bodies and their own futures. Some people aren't more worthy of that than others, and some people's abortions aren't more deserved than others. This is a right that should be freely exercised by anyone who needs it. And let's talk about facts, how things are actually happen. Rape and incest exceptions are rarely used, and that's because you have to prove and relive your trauma in order to do that. Most survivors don't actually report rape or incest to the police, often out of fear or shame or trauma, and often proving rape or incest to get abortion care means providing a police report, forcing survivors to navigate the legal system to qualify for care, a legal system that we all know does not work very quickly or necessarily equitably. Imagine being a young lieutenant in the military when you get raped by maybe someone you're serving with, or maybe even someone in your chain of command, which we know has happened. You are saying that she would not be able to get the abortion care she needs unless she reports to the very chain of command that maybe was part of her abuse? That is ridiculous and so demeaning of our service women. And we've seen in recent years that the vague definition of what counts as a threat to the mother's life or health is incredibly dangerous. A 2024 ProPublica investigation found that at least 2 women, Amber Nicole Thurman and Candy Miller, died in Georgia after being denied medical care stemming from these abortion restrictions, and a separate study in a medical journal in 2024 found that many providers are preoccupied with the need to protect themselves from criminal liability and are increasingly hesitant to provide abortion care that their patients need. These exceptions aren't compassionate. They're not reasonable, and they are not a compromise. And I think it's very telling that every single member who's spoken in favor of this has been a man, and every single spoken against this has been a man, and every single person who's spoken in favor of it has been a woman. And it's okay if you don't understand how reproduction works, but why don't you defer policy judgments to those of us who do? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment so we can remove these dangerous exceptions, and I yield back.
Chair, gentlelady yields back. The chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cisneros.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am in full support of this amendment by my good friend, Representative Sherrill from New Jersey. When I was Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, we changed the DoD policy so that service members or their family members could travel to get reproductive health care if it was not allowed in a state where they were stationed. As proud as I was that we were able to do that and to update it and provide that to our service members, I still knew that it wasn't enough because they were not able to get the care that they needed where they were stationed, which they should be entitled to. You know, as a Californian, an individual from California can go and they can get the reproductive health care, they can get the abortion, they can get also, you know, IVF and other things too, right, to help them have a child as well. And it's unfair that that is not allowed and not available throughout the country, that they are not able to get the abortion. On the other side of the aisle here, or on the other side of the table here, I participated and testified in a personnel and readiness, or personnel subcommittee hearing on reproductive health care. And the stories that the women service members told was just so overwhelming about how important it was to be able to have that choice, to make that decision for themselves as to how they wanted to proceed with their life and how really transformative it was to their career. For some of them, it allowed them to make this decision and stay going with their career because they just were not at a point in their life where they were ready to have a child. So I am in full support of this amendment. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this. Give women the choice of health care that they deserve and that they should have. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Whitesides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of Congressman Sherrill's amendment to repeal the restrictions placed on our service members seeking reproductive care. Let's be clear, we are living in a time when my daughter has fewer reproductive rights than her mother did. Most women in our armed services joined when Roe was the law of the land. We made them a promise that their rights would be protected. Now, with no control over where they are stationed, we are threatening their basic fairness and freedom. No one who signs up to serve our country should be denied access to essential health care, especially not because of where they are stationed. Right now, nearly half of American servicewomen live in states that restrict abortion care. Women in uniform are being forced to navigate a patchwork of state laws as well as their chain of command that often ignore their sacrifice and strip away their autonomy. That's unacceptable. Reproductive care, including abortion, is health care, and denying it puts lives and careers at risk. Our service members do not lose their rights when they put on the uniform. This amendment would restore their dignity, respects their service, and affirms that the government should not interfere with private medical decisions. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and stand up for the many women who defend our freedoms every day. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anybody else wish to speak on Ms. Sherrill's amendment? Hearing none, there's no further debate. The amendment on the amendment offered by Ms. Sherrill. So many as in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Would you like a recorded vote? Recorded votes requested. Recorded vote will be postponed. We now consider log number 5586R1 by Ms. Sherrill. For what purposes, the gentlelady from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentlelady for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment does not create new policy. It simply codifies current policy that the Department of Defense has been practicing for over a decade by affirming women's eligibility for combat roles and allows for waiver, if necessary, for exclusion. This amendment does not change requirements, standards, or qualifications for any service member assigned to their position in the military. So let me repeat this. This amendment does not change any standards, and suggestions that it does are simply misstatements meant to attack women's service. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1994. The first year women were allowed to serve in certain combat roles, including my role as a naval aviator. I qualified as an expert shot in an M16 rifle, Colt 45, and a 9mm Beretta. I'd put my training up against anyone else's, and in the 9 years I served alongside incredibly intelligent, dedicated, and strong women whose service was just as valuable as anyone else's. More than 9,000 women have earned combat action ribbons during modern combat operations, including those in Iraq and Afghanistan, and hundreds more have earned Valor Awards. Take Army First Sergeant Leah Ann Hester, for example, who was the first woman awarded the Silver Star for direct combat action after her heroic actions against an enemy ambush in Iraq. She cleared 2 enemy trenches against overwhelming odds alongside her fellow soldiers. Neither her comrades nor the enemy cared if she was a man or a woman. Since 2015, women have been serving in direct combat roles alongside men. Whether it's conventional units or selective units, such as the 75th Ranger Regiment, women have served in these units in direct ground combat operations with distinction. Throughout the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, women operated in crucial roles under fire alongside men, like the women of the Lioness teams who cleared homes and gathered intelligence of suspected militants. Their service saved lives and contributed significantly to mission success. Oddly, Secretary Hegseth stated during his confirmation hearing that, quote, "some of the best soldiers I ever worked with were women," and yet he continues to attack their service. Codifying women's eligibility for combat roles is about honoring the reality of our armed forces today. It's about ensuring fairness, maintaining our military's operational effectiveness, and recognizing the bravery and sacrifice of thousands of women who have fought and will continue to fight alongside their male counterparts. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to codify women's eligibility for combat roles, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes himself to To be clear, this amendment purports to prevent gender from being considered when assigning service members to different positions. It does not mention men, women, or biological sex. It is already policy that the military assigns members based on merit and the needs of the service. Men and women may serve in any position they are qualified to serve. I oppose this amendment. Does anybody else wish to speak on Ms. Sherrill's amendment? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Houlihan, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am again in strong support of my colleague's amendment to codify women's roles in combat. It is very, very clear that Secretary Hegseth is on a mission to bit by bit get women out of the military. So this is another case of belts and suspenders. I fear that we need to codify the progress that women have made in combat. Time and time again, Secretary Hegseth has said that women should not be in combat roles, and since taking the helm at the Pentagon, he's removed top women leaders, he's changed fitness standards, he's scrubbed female military history, and more. Even in front of this very committee, he refused to acknowledge the vital role that women play in our military readiness, warfighting, and lethality. Aside from being empirically sexist and disrespectful, Secretary Hegseth's actions are irresponsible. Women do make up 18% of our active duty force and do make up 22% of our National Guard. And I believe this growth is not because of policy, it's despite recent policy. As I've already said, women's service improves innovation and mission outcomes. It makes our military stronger, smarter, and more prepared to face the challenges of modern warfare. Our military cannot be fully ready to face the challenges of tomorrow without maintaining and strengthening the numbers of women who serve, and we must continue to support the women who raise their hand. We must codify the role of women fighting for us in all ways, in all positions. I very much support my friend's amendment, and I urge my colleagues on all sides of the aisle, both sides of the aisle, to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While this is intended to promote equality, this amendment risks degrading military readiness and warfighting flexibility. Current authority exists under Title 10 U.S.C. Code 652, which already protects against unjust exclusion. I have served in combat with women that I proudly call my comrade in arms. They are just as lethal, just as good in some positions. The ability already exists for them to serve alongside anybody, anywhere. This is just a cheap shot at the Secretary of Defense. It has nothing to do, we don't need to codify it, it's already into law. And so I just ask, do not support this amendment. Women are absolutely lethal and effective in all roles in the military, and we do not need a political statement made in this committee to do what they already have. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to support Ms. Sherrill's amendment. You know, my colleagues have repeatedly said that the ability exists. That is often true, right? The executive branch and the Department of Defense often have the ability or the authority to do things. And yet, policy of any one administration set by the leader of the department can decide whether to do those things, which is why Congress exists. Because it's then our job, if we believe that the policy or the decisions of any one administration are inconsistent with the values of our nation or undermine the role of our military. This amendment would say that the policies of this administration when it comes to women in the military and in combat are inconsistent with the values and morals of this country and what's in the best interests of our service members. That's why we legislate. I did 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I can tell you a lot of things make up an effective combat soldier. Grit, courage, mental and physical toughness, steadiness, ingenuity, and teamwork. Men and women can and do possess these qualities. I am all about maintaining equal standards. That's what this amendment would do, but providing opportunity for men and women to stand up and to show those qualities and to serve our nation. And I would encourage my colleagues to join us in passing this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Sherrill, for introducing an important amendment. And again, as we've heard from my colleagues before this, these are not debates that we frankly thought we needed to have or should have to have, but we've seen a rollback of progress that has been made. Progress towards more Americans serving this country, more Americans, men and women, being able to step up and raise their right hand and take that oath that has now been in place and proven to be successful in creating a more lethal, cohesive, and effective force since the policy was put into place in 2013. So with respect to my colleagues, if our goals are to have more folks serving, to up our recruitment numbers, then why would you oppose codifying this? If, as Mr. Kelly rightly said, women have and continue to prove themselves as lethal and ferocious fighters, not just as lethal and ferocious as men, but in many, many cases, more lethal and ferocious than men. If you agree with that, as I appreciate him saying, then why would you oppose codifying that into law? So again, I just want to say that I support this and finally drive home the point of the reality. It's striking that 9,000 women have earned the same combat action badge ribbon that I proudly earned and many others on the committee and across the country. This is just about recognizing that and seeing it as an opportunity to unify the country, not to divide us. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on Ms. Sherrill's amendment? There's no further debate. The question occurs on the amendment offered by Ms. Sherrill. So many who are in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Pending the chair, the ayes have it. Recorded votes requested. Recorded vote will be postponed. We will now consider log number 4967 by Mr. Luttrell. For what purposes does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment without objection? The reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair and I recognize the gentleman from Texas for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would prohibit any funds to furnish, export, or sell, transfer cluster munitions or its technology. And I want to thank the young lady from California, Ms. Jacobs, for joining me on this. Cluster munitions have a documented failure rate. These exploded bomblets become de facto landmines, injuring and killing civilians, including children. Long after conflicts has ceased, the Cluster Munitions Monitor of 2023 reported that over 96% of cluster munition casualties in recent years have been civilians, and 2/3 of those being children. And in 2025, we have technologies that you can launch from a rotor wing or a fixed wing aircraft. You can probably launch it from here and park it on a license plate. And when the advancements of drone technology and swarm technology, you can touch anything, anywhere, with no residual effect, i.e. killing our babies. In my personal opinion, having seen cluster bombs in action, it's one of the things I wish we could disinvent. I know Ms. Jacobs and I probably stand alone on this, but I honestly think this is a valued effort. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you do not stand alone. As the chair, co-chair of the Unexploded Ordnance and Demining Caucus, I am very proud to support this amendment offered by Representatives Jacobs and Luttrell that would prohibit the production, use, and transfer of cluster munitions. These indiscriminate weapons litter small bombs over large areas with little control over where the explosives falls, posing significant risks to civilians in the area. Cluster submunitions have a very high failure rate, between 2 and 40%, either failing to detonate or breaking apart in the air, and unexploded bombs or fragments can remain volatile for years. This prolongs the risk to civilians for years after fighting stops, particularly a risk to children. More than 100 countries have already banned the use of cluster munitions because of the disproportionate risk they pose to civilians, and it's time for the U.S. to do the same. So I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment, and with that, I yield.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I appreciate my colleagues' effort to put this bill forward. It's the continual argument back and forth. There's a moral argument to talk about what cluster munitions result in, but on the other side, the moral argument is what do we do to prevent adversaries from using cluster munitions? The way you deter that is to make sure that you have the ability to use that. The dud rate on our cluster munitions is incredibly low. Not fail-proof, but incredibly low. We know, too, that when we have low weapons magazine capability, as we have today, we want to make sure we have everything there at our disposal to make sure that we're deterring our adversaries. These munitions, as objectionable as they are, do allow us to make sure that when necessary, we're able to defend our interest. And we want to make sure, too, that we're helping our allies. The munitions that we transfer are ones with, as I said, very, very low failure rates. And by transferring these dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, the DPICMs, we preserve our limited 155 stockpiles, which today is incredibly low, and we are able to at least create the deterrence there. And folks said, well, you know, you can use other means to deter. Remember, deterrence is about using the same level of threat that keep your adversaries from even being tempted to use this. If you use other threats that are greater, you end up escalating those back and forths. I would argue that if you want to create the largest potential to deter adversaries from using cluster munitions, you have to be able to say, if you use yours, we will use ours. That idea, and we heard it earlier with nuclear arms, we heard the idea of mutually assured destruction is a very, very strong deterrent. I want to make sure, first of all, that we are using the weapons that we have in our inventory to defend U.S. interest, understanding the moral arguments on both sides of this, but I want to make sure, too, that we still have the deterrent effect to deter our adversaries from using these, and, two, when we have challenges with weapons magazines, that we don't limit ourselves in the ability for us to be able to protect our interest around the world. I know there's a lot of back and forth in this. There are valid moral arguments to be made on both sides. Listen, I respect my colleagues in bringing this up. It's a continual effort. I appreciate my colleague from the great state of Texas and his passion for this. But I just want to make sure, too, that we're looking at all the impacts of this proposed ban on cluster munitions from United States stockpiles.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of Representative Jacobs and Luttrell's amendment to ban cluster munitions. Cluster munitions aren't deterrents. They're indiscriminate killers. And while not cluster munitions, Hawaii and the Pacific Islands understand, sadly, the pain and frustration of unexploded ordinances. Looking in at your ancestral homeland where you can no longer live or walk. Every new discovery, and they come often, a scary reminder that when it comes to UXOs, the dangers of war live on to haunt generation after generation. Now, times this by 100 in terms of impact, the terror, the harm that cluster munitions have on people and communities around the world. And that is why this amendment is so important. Due to the high failure rates of these munitions, and let's be clear, low failure rates still kill. These exponential amounts of unexploded ordinances that litter the world right now as a result of these bombings kill and maim primarily civilians, as was mentioned, making up 96% of all casualties, including and especially children who are likely to pick up these unexploded ordinances. It's the casualties after the war, with thousands losing life and limb every single year. We've spent billions cleaning up cluster munitions from battlefields. Most of our allies, as have been mentioned, banned these munitions by signing on to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, recognizing their use as a violation of international humanitarian law. The future of warfare is not cluster munitions. It's drones, other unmanned vehicles, cyber, missile defense, electromagnetic warfare. We all do want lethality. We want deterrence, but let's focus on platforms that truly reduce civilian harm and actually hit their intended targets. and not innocent victims that happen to be walking through a field. That means not doubling down on these damaging and unnecessary munitions. That means banning these altogether in terms of cluster munitions. Thank you again to the sponsors of this amendment, and I ask that all join us in supporting this amendment's passage. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose this amendment. It is important to point out that the United States is not part of the Convention on Cluster Munitions. Prohibiting funds for or the transfer of cluster munitions would not only limit American capability, but Ukrainian ability to push back war criminal Putin with his mass murder of civilians invading Ukraine. Russia is currently utilizing every weapon in their arsenal, including cluster munitions and possibly including chemical weapons, to murder civilians and hit civilian infrastructure. Prohibiting the transfer of cluster munitions would handicap Ukraine, and its biggest beneficiary would be war criminal Putin. The U.S. should not restrict Ukrainian ability to defend themselves when they are the ones requesting these types of munitions for defense of Ukrainian sovereignty to achieve peace through strength. There are legitimate issues of unexploded cluster munitions, but a reminder is Ukraine is requesting them. Also, compared to Russia, which is not part of the convention, there are unexploded ordnance are high from the Russian Federation. The U.S. has worked responsibly to lower the rates of unexploded cluster ordnances, and Russia doesn't do as Ukraine, in that Ukraine is also aware of areas they are utilizing, which will be helpful once the conflict is over, to reduce and eliminate the number of exploded ordnance. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Luttrell, for co-leading and leading this effort with me. I appreciate his efforts. Look, most U.S. allies, including most NATO members, have signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, but we haven't. And that's a mistake because these weapons leave behind unexploded landmines that maim and kill civilians indiscriminately. In 2021, the Landmine and Cluster Munitions Monitor found that over 97% of casualties from cluster bomb remnants were civilians, and 2/3 of those were children. 2/3 of those were children. And that's because these deadly weapons don't look like weapons, but they do look interesting to kids, so when kids find these weapons in trees or in the water or simply on the ground, they try and pick them up, and they can end up losing a limb or their life. And we know even our cluster munitions dud rates are consistently higher than expected in war zones. But this is not just a moral argument, it is a strategic and financial one. These weapons are incredibly costly. Since 1993, the United States has spent nearly $5 billion on cleaning up these weapons. As of last year, we were still paying to clean up cluster munitions the United States dropped in Laos because they were still killing civilians. Continuing to transfer cluster munitions is not just a moral stain on the U.S. reputation around the world, but a fiscally irresponsible one for years to come. And to my colleague's argument about deterrence, imagine saying we should use chemical weapons to deter chemical weapons. I mean, it makes no sense because it makes no sense. We shouldn't just do something just because Russia is also doing it and doing it worse. That's like the first thing we teach kids. No amount of guardrails for cluster munitions are enough. We need to ban the transfer of these weapons entirely, and now is our opportunity to do that, to do the right thing and protect civilians, especially kids. Now is our chance to restore our reputation, to live up to our values. This is a bipartisan amendment. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want, first of all, to acknowledge the very valid and serious concerns that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have raised with this amendment. And I am all for a treaty banning cluster munitions that we can all sign on to. But we can't unilaterally disarm, especially in the midst of the brutal war in Ukraine. I also want to appreciate my colleague from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for citing, and I quote, the strong arguments that we heard earlier explaining the importance of mutually assured destruction and how that's critical for deterrence. which I think is the strongest case I've heard yet for my amendment to restore that bipartisan language to our strategic defense policy, which unfortunately he voted against. But the point is that Ukraine wants these weapons for their own territory. And who better to make that determination than them? We all care about kids. You know what kills kids in the U.S.? Firearms. Firearms are the leading cause of death for children and adolescents ages 1 to 17. In fact, one of the worst things you can do to increase that risk is simply having guns in your own home. But I don't think you want this committee to come and tell you whether or not you can have guns in your home in Texas, even though it would statistically help your kids. But that's what we're telling Ukraine. That's what we're saying to Ukraine. In this case, the cluster munitions have demonstrably helped them in the conflict. They have made the tough decision, the tough determination that they are willing to take the risk of casualties from unexploded ordnance in order to win this war, to protect their kids from Russia, a country that's already kidnapped thousands of them and is trying to kill thousands more on the battlefield. So I think we should leave that decision to them and support them however we can in this war. Very valid concerns, but in this case, the tough decision is the right decision to get them the weapons that they need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my colleagues' compelling arguments. And but for Ukraine, I'd probably be with them. But the problem is Russia is doing what they're doing in Ukraine. And the argument about unexploded ordnance on the battlefield is a legitimate one, except the more Russia succeeds, the more unexploded ordnance there is going to be in Ukraine. Russia has used cluster munitions throughout Ukraine indiscriminately. They've also mined the living crap out of Ukraine. There is going to be unexploded ordnance in Ukraine for generations, which is horrific. And if there was some way to stop that or have prevented that, I'd be all in favor of it. But given what Russia is doing there, Ukraine needs everything they can to try to stop them. The longer the war goes on, the more unexploded ordnance you're going to have, and oh, by the way, the more exploding ordnance that you're going to have. We struggled to provide the weapons that Ukraine needed to defend themselves. We had cluster munitions, and the decision was to transfer them to Ukraine. You want to make this about other stuff beyond Ukraine? I think there may be a strategic argument for that. But in Ukraine, they needed them. And when you are threatened by Russia, you need them. And they were transferred as a result. It's worth noting, as far as I know, we are not actually making cluster munitions anymore. These were munitions that we had, so we're not wasting money on them. And then also, it is interesting on the treaty to not use cluster munitions. One of the countries that just withdrew from that treaty was Lithuania, because they faced the threat that Russia's coming at them. So I'm with you. We want to live in a world where cluster munitions aren't used. I think the U.S. should try to strive to achieve that. But if this amendment were to pass, Ukraine would be less able to defend itself against Russia dropping all manner of ordnance all over Ukraine, unexploded and otherwise. So as a practical matter, this amendment weakens Ukraine and strengthens Russia in this current moment, and therefore I cannot support it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on Mr. Luttrell's amendment? Seeing none, the question occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Luttrell. So many as are in favor will say aye. Those opposed say no. No. Appearing the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed. A recorded vote's requested. Recorded vote will be postponed. We will now consider log number 5680 by Mr. Bell. For what purposes, gentlemen from Missouri, seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. I reserve a point of order against the amendment. With that, I recognize the gentleman to explain his amendment.
For decades, families in the St. Louis region, but now more relevantly in North St. Louis, in the 63106 and 63107 zip codes, have suffered the health impacts of radioactive waste exposure without recognition or justice. This amendment, including those two zip codes, 63106 and 63107, would change that and right a terrible wrong. I rise today to make sure the people of North St. Louis are part of the conversation, because no community should be forgotten when it comes to toxic exposure. This amendment acknowledges what so many in our community have known all along: the government's failure to safely handle nuclear waste poisoned our neighborhoods, and survivors deserve compensation. For families in these zip codes, this isn't just about dollars, it's about accountability, recognition, and the basic right to live free from the harm of environmental injustice. I've said from day one, I'll never stop fighting for justice in our community. Expanding RECA to include 63106 and 63107 is a long overdue step forward, and I'll keep pushing until every impacted family gets the justice and care they deserve. I've been informed this amendment did not clear the point of order, so I withdraw this amendment and yield back.
The chair thanks the gentleman for withdrawing his amendment. We will now consider log number 5113R1 by Ms. Strickland. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Washington State seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentlelady for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. In fiscal year 2021 NDAA, which covers 2020, this committee created the Commission on the Naming of Items of the Department of Defense that commemorate the Confederate States of America. Since the height of the Jim Crow era, our service members who come from every background and walk of life have been working and living at installations that honor men who took up arms in rebellion against our country, fighting to protect the institution of slavery. This committee put in the work to correct this injustice, and the Naming Commission followed with extensive community engagement, site visits, congressional briefings, and deliberation. This commission specifically rejected proposals to rename bases after service members who shared the same names as the Confederate traitors. Now, we know politics isn't about nuance these days, so just pay attention to these details. Instead, this commission chose to honor a new generation of Army legends, including General Richard Cavazos, Lieutenant General Hal Moore, and Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. Unfortunately, Secretary Hegseth and the Trump administration decided to troll the American public and discard the hard work of this committee and commission by reverting base names. And they used the same ploy that the commission rejected, finding new service members who shared the last names of these Confederate traitors. These service members are heroes in their own right, and we don't deny that, like Private Fitz Lee, a Buffalo soldier who was awarded the Medal of Honor. Yet Secretary Hegseth saw them as nothing more than convenient names. Their families were not given the opportunity to weigh in if their legacy should be used this way. President Trump gave up the ruse last month when he said out loud that Fort Gregg Adams is being restored to Fort Lee in honor of Robert E. Lee, not Fitz Lee, as the secretary claimed. This cynical exercise was done with no input from the communities who collaborated on this important change and stripped away the honor bestowed upon patriots, again, without the input of their descendants. Secretary Hegseth's work was so sloppy that my colleagues are now trying to correct his mistakes and offering amendments to again modify individual base names in a way that is less offensive to some families of fallen service members. In 2020, a bipartisan group of legislators actually overrode Trump's veto of the NDAA because he did not want this commission to exist. So this was a bipartisan effort. My amendment simply prevents any funds appropriated to the Department of Defense from being used to contravene or reverse the work of the Naming Commission that was established in 2020. In the spirit of government efficiency, the department must stop lighting taxpayer money on fire to play games with military history. I urge my colleagues to please vote yes on this amendment. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. McGuire.
Mr. Chairman, I oppose this amendment from the gentlewoman from Washington. I have many disagreements with the recommendations and actions of the Naming Commission. However, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth are working to restore and honor American history. Contrary to Ms. Strickland's amendment, Secretary Hegseth is not renaming bases in support of Confederate heroes. Example, Secretary Hegseth renamed Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia to Fort Lee, a member of the all-black Buffalo Soldiers who was awarded the Medal of Honor after serving in the Spanish-American War. However, the naming commission's actions were perceived by many people, including a sizable part of my district, Virginia's 5th Congressional District, as attack on American history. Right or wrong, Winston Churchill famously stated, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I feel this applies to attempts to erase history, much as the names of our military installations. There were also places that many of those who served during the same time as myself feel a connection to and have fond memories from our time in military service. When I was stationed at SEAL Team 4, I sometimes considered Fort Pickett my second home. I applaud the work being done by the administration and oppose this amendment on the grounds that it further seeks to prevent this wrong from being rectified. And again, history should be taught, not erased. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, Chair, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fundamental dishonesty of this argument is just staggering to me, okay? So let's just be clear. These bases were reverted back to the names for the Confederates for whom they were named in the first place. Okay, you're going to have us believe that there was just this unbelievable coincidence of all the names of all the service members that have served honorably in this country for a couple centuries now. We just happened to pick the exact same names of the Confederates that went before. So let's at least be honest about what was done. There were people, a minority, who opposed changing the names away from the Confederates. Okay, that did exist, all right? And so Trump got elected president, and you tore it up, and you went back to the names of the Confederates. But if we can please just dispense with that idiotic argument, and then at least focus on what the actual debate is about, that would help, number one. Number two, the commission that was put together, and Mr. Scott on this committee served on it, did an incredible job of going into the communities and having a broad conversation about why the names were being changed and what they should be changed to. The communities contributed enormously to the names that were selected. They weren't a couple people in the Pentagon off in a corner making some decision. It really honored the communities in a way that this committee ought to respect. Even if you think the so-called heritage in this case should be preserved, you should recognize that the committee that changed those names did it in a bipartisan way that was incredibly respectable and honoring of what representative democracy is supposed to be about. So those are two huge points. And the last point is erasing history. Honest to God, you think if we change the name of a base, oh my God, we've erased history. Nobody remembers the Civil War anymore. No one remembers Robert E. Lee. No one remembers any of these generals. We changed the name. No, what we are changing is what we at this current moment in our history think we should honor, what we think we want to value and respect. And I won't belabor the point because I've made this argument over the course of 4 years repeatedly, but we should not honor the people who fought against our nation, who rebelled and tried to destroy the country in order to maintain their right to enslave their fellow human beings. We should not honor that. And I swear to you, it's just astonishing to me that we're having that debate. I mean, you can go after DEI aggressively in 1,000 different ways for 1,000 different reasons, and I'd even have some sympathy in a few places on that one. But that we're having a debate about whether or not we need to honor the history of the Civil War from that perspective. And again, you can argue, and I don't disagree with the notion that we shouldn't pretend like it didn't happen. We are not pretending like it didn't happen. We are not erasing history. There are history books all over the place that talk about the Civil War and all the generals who fought in it. We just shouldn't be honoring the people who rebelled against our nation to preserve slavery. We shouldn't be. And we set up a very bipartisan process to fix that. And now, they've just reversed it to go back to honoring the Confederates. It's not to honor these other people who are worthy of honor. It's to make sure you put the name back so that the people who want to honor the Confederates can still think they are. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't have done it. And I support this amendment to reverse it.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some agreed with the names selected by the commission, some didn't. As someone who served on the commission for 3 years, I will tell you the commission used a process. They went to every base. We narrowed down through historians what we felt like were 10 appropriate names for the bases. We presented those names to the community at the bases, the soldiers, as well as the civilian support networks. We then asked them if they had additional names that they recommended for the base renaming. And I'll speak only to one of them. Specifically, I'll speak to Bragg. So the base renaming commission, we went to Bragg. We met with them. They were not happy, as many of the people were not happy. But don't blame the commission, because the commission followed the law. Blame the law if you don't like what the law did. But the commission went to Bragg. And we had 10 names that eventually got narrowed down to Schuetgart Gordon, Benavidez, and Ridgway. Ridgway being one of our greatest generals, the 82nd, who's based at Bragg. Benavidez, who was one of our greatest soldiers, Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, and then Schuetgart Gordon, the 2 Delta guys that went in Mogadishu, which are both Medal of Honor recipients, died at the same time. We got a phone call from the commission, from the base area, and the Gold Star parents asked that it be named Liberty. And we honored the request of the Gold Star family. Now the name Liberty never took hold. I say that just to say that is the process that the commission used. Now, I understand some people don't like the end result of it. That's fine. But the commission followed the law, and the commission did their job. What has been done now is that the bases are named after people because of their surnames. That's literally why they're named. And so I respect the lady. I don't intend to vote for the amendment. I think the next president, if it's a Democrat, will rename the bases. The president has always had the ability to name the bases, and they still do. And so my fear is that we've started a cycle now where the pendulum continues to swing, and we have unfortunately politicized the naming of our military installations. But I expect that these names will probably be changed the next time there's a Democratic president, because of the way it's been done in the past. And with that, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my time to my colleague from Washington, Ms. Strickland.
Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for this very thoughtful discussion. Although I have to point out the hypocrisy that's happening right here. So we don't want to run from history, and we want to maintain and honor it if it's a Confederacy. But don't let a woman or a person of color have their story told on a DOD website. Let's not teach history in schools about what happened if it makes a certain group of people uncomfortable. So I don't like the fact that I think, to your point, that this is going to become politicized, but this commission was created, they had a task, they received community input, and they named these bases. And what is happening right now is disingenuous. They're trying to be sneaky and they're trying to be cute. But again, if you want to honor history, then honor it all over the place. If you want to keep these bases in Confederacy, then don't erase people from your website or from history books or teach history at the military service academies. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I intend to support the amendment, bottom line. We debated this in 2020, and some folks in here voted yes, some voted no, but it was debated in a Democrat House and a Republican Senate, and it passed. So it was a bipartisan bill, and then the president vetoed it, not just for this reason, but there was a couple reasons, and it was overrode by the Democrat House and the Republican Senate. This has been hashed out. And what the administration is doing, particularly the Secretary of Defense, is sticking his finger in the eye of Congress by going back and changing the names to the old names, granted, different first names. But it's not right. And I get it. Some people support the names, the old names, others don't. I come from a family from Virginia. We were raised in Charlottesville in the Civil War time frame, but we fought for the North. My family was abolitionist, so I know where my family stands on this whole debate. But a few things we should know. General Bragg was one of the worst generals in the history of this country. He was a failure, and a base is named after him. I get it, some people don't associate with him, but some do. I also think having a base named Eisenhower, I can't think of a better base name than Hal Moore and his wife, heroes in Vietnam, beloved by everybody. And I don't know anybody that doesn't like Eisenhower or the Moores. So it chagrined me that the administration went back on. I think Austin Scott is right. The next president's going to change it back. We should stick with what Congress voted on and overrode in the vetoes. And that was policy. We debated it fairly, and it went one way. And with the Republican Senate. I just want to point that out. So with that, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague, Mr. Bacon, is exactly right. So is Mr. Scott. This is politicization of the military. You can teach history without honoring traitors. And with all due respect to my colleague and fellow veteran from Virginia, you were brave enough to serve on SEAL Team 4, and yet you can't deal with the supposed discomfort of not feeling nostalgia for the name of your base? So let's cite a celebrated military leader of the past few decades who served at these bases, including Bragg, Pickett, Polk, and Benning, longer than I think anyone in this room, General David Petraeus. A few years ago, he said, quote, "For an organization designed to win wars, to train for them at installations named for those who led a losing force is sufficiently peculiar. But when we consider the cause for which these officers fought, we begin to penetrate the confusion of Civil War memory. These bases are, after all, federal installations, home to soldiers who swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. The irony of training at bases named for those who took up arms against the United States and for the right to enslave others is inescapable to anyone paying attention. It's time to remove the names of traitors like Benning and Bragg from our country's most important military installations." He concludes. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Bell.
Sometimes this town is just absolutely crazy. Maybe I'm 6 months in, so, I'm coming in from a different perspective. But, this is nuts. This country has an original sin. We know that. So everything is looked at through the lens of Republicans and Democrats, but what about right and wrong? Slavery, first of all, when we talk about slavery, we were talking about taking people and making them into property. But that wasn't even the worst part of it. We're talking rape. We're talking about separating families. Like, this whole legacy is what we're talking about when we're talking about slavery. We're not talking about a little inconvenience like, hey, no big deal, rub some dirt on it and move on. This was like generations. There are people who lived and died as slaves. And we want to continue this memory for some reason? Like, help me understand the logic of that. And let's take it a little bit further. After slavery, we didn't say, oh, we're sorry. We went into Jim Crow. And so we took people's rights away. We wouldn't let people vote. Black folks were terrorized by Ku Klux Klan. We had redlining, all of this stuff which was done by the same laws that you're talking about are somehow appropriate in this debate, which this isn't even a debate. It's just ridiculous. So this is not a complicated situation. People are making it complicated. Slavery was wrong. What happened to people was wrong. The discrimination, that legacy that we saw for generations and generations was wrong. So let's acknowledge it finally by at least not putting the names and putting the names on our buildings and like they did something worth honoring. Come on, stop it. That's insane.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Vindman of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I served on more than half a dozen bases during my 25-year career. And you know what I think about when I think about those bases? It's not really the names. It's the people that you served with, the relationships that you built, who you deployed with. Those are the things that are important about those bases. It's the mission that you all serve together to accomplish. And this is just a massive distraction for all the reasons that my colleagues on the other side have talked about, the fact that there was a congressional process, eloquent statements about the thought that went into thinking about what these base names should be, the great Americans that they were named after, Ridgway and Eisenhower. Those are the reasons why this is a massive distraction. As a retired member of the U.S. military, this is just a massive distraction. It's unnecessary. We like our new base names in Virginia. And I hear from military families and active duty service members who are facing real challenges like increasing rents and mortgages and VA backlogs and the strain of high prices at the grocery store. Meanwhile, this administration is focused on everything but lowering costs for hardworking families, and we should just focus on what the American people expect of us. With that, I yield my time to Mr. Bell.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say is, why not speak up for Americans who fought, bled for this country? African Americans fought in every single war, bled and died in every single war. Why not speak up for those Americans? Why not honor that legacy by saying, hey, this was wrong, which it seems to me in 2025 is insane that I have to actually say it in this House. But why not speak up? Why not honor those folks who actually built much of this country for free, were never given any compensation, and then fought in every war and died in every war and still loved this country? How about that? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Seeing none, the question occurs on the amendment offered by Ms. Strickland. For all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. A recorded vote is requested. Recorded vote will be postponed. I would like to say this is our last amendment we're going to debate, so members who are in their offices need to make their way back to the chamber, because after this amendment debate, we'll have 2 en bloc readings, which is going to be very exciting. And then we're going to have our final series of votes for the night. You don't want to miss that. I want a full audience for that. All right, we will now We will now consider log number 5442 by Mr. Garamendi. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. I reserve a point of order against the amendment, and I recognize the gentleman from California to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to make this very, very brief, but you confused me with your scheduling thing here. I'm not sure if you want me to go on until everybody arrives. Well, I am overwhelmed by the negative reaction. Come on, troops, it's not that bad. Okay, it is 2:46. I will be finished in 43 seconds. There's what you may consider to be an obscure thing in the Department of Defense is called the Defense Reciprocal Act. And basically, it's the Department of Defense cutting a deal with some country on reciprocal military equipment back and forth. Sometimes it's parts and pieces or other things. Sometimes we're sending off HIMARS or whatever. There's a mechanism set up under law that would require that the Department of Defense consult with the Treasury Department, Commerce Department, with the trade rep, and a couple of others. Routinely, the Defense Department doesn't do that. The result of that is that the great Make It America, Buy America, America First agenda kind of gets pushed to the side. So this amendment would require that the Defense Department follow the procedures, involve the other agencies, get the full reading, and I'm out of time. With that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman for gentleman withdraws his amendment. Chair thanks the gentleman for withdrawing his amendment. We will now consider en bloc package number 4. I ask unanimous consent to call up en bloc package number 4, consisting of amendments that have been worked and approved with the minority without objection so ordered. Will the clerk please distribute the en bloc amendment? Without objection, the amendments are considered as read. En bloc package number 4 is comprised of the following: Log 4764R3 by Representative Whitman, Log 4774 by Representative Graves, Log 4797R2 by Representative Bergman, Log 4801R2 by Representative Fallon, Log 4802R3 by Representative Fallon, Log 4804R1 by Representative Fallon, Log 4811R2 by Representative Kelly, Log 4826R2 by Representative Whitman, Log 4865R2 by Representative Harrigan, Log 4905R1 by Representative McGuire, Log 4984R1 by Representative Jackson, Log 5073 by Representative Mace, Log 5146R3 by Representative Goodlander, Log 5186R1 by Representative Courtney, Log 5300R2 by Representative Garamendi, Log 5213R2 by Representative Scott, Log 5310R1 by Representative Garamendi, Log 5328R1 by Representative Crowe, Log 5329R1 by Representative Jacobs, Log 5342 by Representative Van Orden, Log 5361R1 by Representative Keating, Log 5363R2 by Representative Moulton, Log 5462R1 by Representative Moulton, Log 4663R1 by Representative Garamendi, Log 4664R2 by Representative Moulton, Log 5472R1 by Representative Whitman, Log 5483R1 by Representative Garamendi, Log 5521R1 by Representative Graves, Log 5554R1 by Representative Bacon, Log 5560 by Representative Mills, Log 5607 by Representative Crank, Log 5624R1 by Representative Fallon, Log 5656R1 by Representative Kelly, Log 5663R2 by Representative Graves, Log 5673R1 by Representative Jacobs, Log 5669R1 by Representative DeLuzio, Log 5640 by Representative Bacon, Log 5617R2 by Representative Fallon, Log 5161R1 by Delegate Moylan. Is there further discussion on the en bloc amendment package? The question is on en bloc package 4. So many as in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment en bloc is agreed to. Again, I want to urge members in their office to migrate back to the chamber. This is the last exciting en bloc amendment, and we're going to have votes right after this. We will now consider en bloc package number 5. I ask unanimous consent to call up en bloc package number 5, consisting of amendments that have been worked and approved with the minority without objection so ordered. Will the clerk please distribute the en bloc amendment? Without objection, the amendments are considered as read. En bloc package number 5 is comprised of the following: 4973R3 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5011 by Representative Jackson, Log 4978R1 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5060R2 by Representative Gooden, Log 4971R1 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5667R3 by Representative Whitesides, Log 4976R2 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5665R2 by Representative Vindman, Log 5668 by Representative Whitesides, Log 5074R1 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5675 by Representative Crowe, Log 5072R1 by Representative Luttrell, Log 5480 R1 by Representative Whitman. Log 5482, R1 by Representative Elfrith. Log 5649 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5216 by Representative Goodlander. Log 5523 by Representative Houlihan. Log 5211 R1 by Representative Golden. Log 5263 by R3 by Representative Harrigan. Log 5652 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5224 R1 by Representative Vindman. Log 5333 R2 by Representative Stefanik. Log 5489 R2 by Representative Stefanik. Log 4975 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5633 R1 by Representative Finstead. Log 5316 R2 by Representative Davis. Log 5067 by Representative Luttrell. Log 4942 R1 by Representative Mills. Log 5592 R1 by Representative Whitman. Log 5075 R1 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5651 R3 by Representative Bacon. Log 4878 R1 by Representative Goodlander. Log 4814 by Representative Luttrell. Log 4769 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5630 R1 by Representative Van Orden. Log 5519 R1 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5679 by Representative Rogers. Log 5609 R2 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5677 by Representative Golden. Log 5276 R1 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5038 R2 by Representative Jimenez. Log 4768 R1 by Representative Luttrell. Log 4979 R2 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5543 by Representative Mace. Log 5650 R1 by Representative Luttrell. Log 5322 R1 by Representative Goodlander. Is there further discussion on the en bloc package? The question is on the en bloc package number 5. So many as in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the en bloc, the amendment package is agreed to. What? We are now going to proceed to those to vote on those amendments where a recorded vote was ordered. The committee postponed on further proceedings on amendment log number 5206 by Mr. Norcross. We shall now resume proceeding on that amendment. The question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman. Oh, okay. Wait on the screen. The chairman will be voting no.
Ranking member will be voting aye.
The clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 30, the nays are 27.
The amendment is agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5620 by Mr. Smith and shall now resume proceedings. The question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting aye.
And so will I. We're together on something.
And we're together more often than
I'm
not.
voting aye, yes.
The clerk will open the machines and the members will vote. Oh, I got the first one too. That's all right. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Oh, he said he was going to be done.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 47, the nays are 10.
The amendment is agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5615 by Mr. Smith and shall now resume proceeding. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their votes by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
The ranking member will be voting aye.
The clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will lock the machine and record the vote.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5616 by Mr. Smith and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
The ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will lock the machine and record the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5626 by Mr. Moulton and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
Ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 55R82, 5582R2 by Mr. Smith and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
Ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5117R3 by Mr. Ryan and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
Ranking member will be voting aye.
The clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. How many more we have? Okay. Okay. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. Committee postponed further proceedings on log number 5455 by Ms. Sherrill and now shall resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
And the ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. There we go. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. Committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5618 by Ms. Sherrill and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
Ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members, no. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Seeing none, the clerk will lock the machine and record the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 27, the nays are 30.
The amendment is not agreed to. Committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5586R1 by Ms. Sherrill and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
A ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 26, the nays are 31.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 4967 by Mr. Luttrell and shall now resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members will record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
And the ranking member will be voting no.
Clerk will open the machine, then members will vote.
It's a weird one, isn't it?
Does any member wish to change his or her vote? I'm sorry? Okay, clerk will lock the machine and report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 15, the nays are 42.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number 5113R1 by Ms. Strickland and now shall resume those proceedings. Question occurs on the amendment. Members record their vote by electronic device. The chairman will be voting no.
And the ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change his or her vote? If not, the clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 29, the nays are 28.
The amendment is agreed to. The committee postponed further proceedings on amendment log number. Oh,
We're done with pending amendments.
we have completed pending amendments.
Green tab.
If there are no further amendments, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for the purpose of offering a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adopt the chairman's mark as amended.
Question is on the motion of the gentleman from Virginia. So many as in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Tenure Chair, the ayes have it. Quorum being present, the motion is agreed to.
All right, tab 10.
We will now vote on reporting the bill favorably to the House. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman, for purposes of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee now report the bill H.R. 3838 as amended favorably to the House.
Question is on the motion from the gentleman from Virginia. So many as are in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Quorum being present, the ayes have it. Chair calls for a recorded vote. Members will record their vote by their assigned electronic device. The chairman will be voting aye.
And the ranking member will be voting aye.
Clerk will open the machine and the members will vote. Row, 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 row. Oh, no. Oh, no, he got company. That is not good.
Okay.
Have all members voted? Is there anybody that wishes to change their vote, Ms. Jacobs? No. Clerk will lock the machine and report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes are 55, the nays are 2.
A quorum being present, the motion is agreed to, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Sorry, it's the only time all day that I need this thing, so take a minute to pull it out. Where am I going here? Sorry. Mr. Chairman, consistent with House rules, I'd like to assert the right of any member to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views for inclusion in the committee's report to the House on the bill just ordered reported.
Pursuant to Clause 2L of House Rule 11, all members are entitled to not less than 2 calendar days to file views in writing. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make necessary conforming technical and clerical changes and to remove from the bill as amended provisions that would cause the bill to be referred to other committees, would result in additional direct spending that would result in an earmark that does not meet the criteria of community funding, or would result in a community funding project for which the requirement of Clause 17 of House Rule 23 have not been met. Without objection, so ordered. Finally, ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to make such motions on the floor as are necessary to go to conference with the Senate on the bill H.R. 3838 or similar Senate measure. Without objection, so ordered. Chair would like to recognize the ranking member for any closing comments.
I just want to say thank you to the entire committee and the staff. You know, it was a difficult process to get here, but once we got rolling through the committee, I think the bipartisanship showed, and we worked through the issues. Took a lot of work on behalf of the staff assembled around us to make that happen. So thank you all very much. And also want to particularly recognize Jeff, the new staff director. You're no Chris Thiessen, but you do an outstanding job. So thank you. And as I understand it, if you could stall for another half hour or 26 minutes here, we could wish the chairman a happy birthday.
No, I don't want one. No, I don't want it that bad. No.
But all right, I won't do that. I'll yield.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, I do want to take issue with a comment made earlier tonight by my friend from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, when she said that she hoped this would be the last NDAA of Ms. Sherrill. While I am confident that the people of New Jersey will be fortunate no matter what office they choose to put Ms. Sherrill in, if she is moved to another office, your presence will be sorely missed on this committee. You are an outstanding member of the HASC, and we appreciate you. And I am honored to serve on a committee with such fine members who work in such a bipartisan fashion. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Congratulations.